Welcome to Unscripted, a podcast with no script by design. We're not following a plan, and that's exactly the point. This show is about whatever's on the minds of your hosts, Larry Lannan and Duncan Giles. We'll dig into what's happening in the world, and just as importantly, what isn't making headlines this week. So with that, let's get started. The conversation could go anywhere because we go wherever the microphones take us. Here's Larry Lannan and Duncan Giles. I'm Lannan, he's Giles, and this is Lannan and Giles Unscripted. We welcome you back. If you have watched or listened to our first podcast, welcome back. If it's your first time, welcome to the podcast. We hope you enjoy it. I'm Larry Lannan, he's Duncan Giles. Duncan, welcome back.
Thanks, Larry. It's always good to be here.
So we're going to have our second one. You know, it's funny, we've nobody's filed for an injunction to stop us with our second podcast. We haven't had any legal actions. Nobody has served us with papers at our home office, mostly because we don't have a home office. You couldn't find us. So hopefully that continues. So for those of you who are listening and not watching on YouTube, Duncan always likes to have a different background. Last time I was trying to guess which planet from Star Wars he was on. He was very cagey about what it was. Now, it appears you're into international travel.
Well, you know, it's going to be pretty hot here in the central Indiana region over the next several days. So I thought I'd hop over to Sydney, take the beautiful wife, Kim, and I just hop over to Sydney. I'd love to visit Australia, but I'm waiting for the transporter to be invented and perfected before I do that.
I'll say one thing. I've known people who have visited Australia. They love the place. So I would love to go someday too. If you can just, you're literally going on the other side of the world. So and it is winter there, as you said. So you don't have any, it is warm there in places, but not as warm as it's going to be. We're in the Midwest, so we're seeing a heat wave coming, and it's really going to most of the eastern U.S. So there will be a heat wave coming to a big part of America in the days after we record this podcast. By the way, we're recording it on the 20th day of June 2025. Duncan, you know, we did our first podcast on Friday the 13th. You always said the 14th was your unlucky day, but it looks like you at least have all your body parts today.
Yep. I came through the 14th unscathed. So far, so good. And like to end that streak.
Okay, good for you. Okay, we'll start off this podcast with the stories that may not have received a lot of attention in most of the media. So, Duncan, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, my first one is something that sort of amazed me. The American Bar Association, the ABA, filed suit against the president, several departments of the United States government, and individuals. And basically, this is because they are stating that because of executive orders and the comments of the administration and several members of the administration, that law firms and lawyers are scared to accept work that they normally would, and it's inhibiting the ability to basically bring lawful suits or bring actions that are lawful, especially in pro bono cases, because they are so scared of the retribution. And it's just it's unheard of for the ABA, for the American Bar Association, which represents all lawyers in the United States, to basically say, hey, look, we cannot countenance this. It's, basically they are trying to fight for the rule of law, as they are saying they are constitutionally protected, and they want to make sure that they're still able to do their jobs. And takes a lot of guts to do this. So I tip my hat to the ABA folks for reaching out and, doing what they need to do to protect the rule of law here in the U.S.
Yeah, there's always been a sort of assumption in American jurisprudence that everybody is entitled to an attorney. Now, some people can pay more for their attorneys than others, but you should have the opportunity to get legal representation. I think what the ABA is saying here is that when the government pressures law firms not to take certain cases, that's when they're stepping in the wrong direction. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And, I want, any attorney should be feel free of reprisal for doing what they believe is a rightful or righteous case. And they shouldn't be constrained by fear of retribution from any part of the government, be it city, state, or federal, for doing their jobs.
Well, here's a story that I found in the news, which I found interesting. Duncan and I live in the state of Indiana. We live in the central part of the state, and this could happen anywhere in the nation. But I think I had no idea this even existed. There's a neighborhood on the southeast side of Indianapolis, Indiana, and they're hearing the sounds of gunfire in their neighborhood. It was just scaring them to death. Obviously, it would. It's a fairly quiet neighborhood most of the time. Turns out there is no actual gunfire. Somebody or some group of people have bought mufflers on their cars. That's right, mufflers on their cars. And when you rev the engine up, it sounds just like gunfire. Now, in Indiana, local governments normally have the right to enact their noise ordinances as they wish. But in this case, for some reason, state law governs mufflers. I have no idea why. So these people apparently are in violation of state law. So they're looking for them. But these poor people in the neighborhood, this one lady was quoted as saying, it sounds like a gunshot. It kind of almost makes us feel like we're in a war zone. They feel like they're in a war zone and there's no real gunfire going on. So unfair, really unfair. I hope these people are caught. And really, what are we going to do with these people who sell mufflers that sound like gunshots?
Yeah, there is no excuse for that type of thing. People are allowed to and should be able to, make modifications on their vehicles as they wish. But when it comes to something, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You shouldn't be able to mimic gunshots just from a muffler to scare the general public. So I hope they do find out who is doing this and take the appropriate actions.
So, do you have another story, Duncan?
I do, and this came from the right now the big beautiful bill. The House of Representatives sent over their bill that had several harmful things to federal employees and their unions in it. And the Senate counterpart committee that deals with government oversight, Senator Paul is the chairperson of this, apparently said, "Hold my beer and watch this." Some of the things that they came up with that are just absolutely unreal. Right now, federal employees who come into federal service at this point pay 4.4% towards their retirement benefits, towards their pension. Under this bill, if you come in as a new employee, they're saying, okay, if you want to come in as an at-will employee, you'll have to pay 9.4%, a full 5% more of your paycheck towards your retirement benefits. But you could be fired at any time and you have no due process, no protections, anything of that nature. If you want those due process and protections, you have to pay 14.4%, a full 10% more than they're doing now, which is just basically trying to eviscerate employees as much as they can. They're also sitting there saying, okay, if you want any deductions from your paycheck, like union dues or things of that nature, we're going to put a 10% surcharge on it. But it's not just union dues. If you have United Way deductions or anything of that nature, that's also going to invoke a 10% charge. There's also saying, okay, for any union office, any union work that's done, that has to be fully paid by the union itself, not by the federal government, as it has been since President Carter proposed and Congress enacted the Civil Service Reform Act. So this is all, they say it's for cost savings. That's BS. It has nothing to do with cost savings. It has everything to do with eviscerating protections for employees. And I'm very glad places like National Treasury Employees Union, AFSCME, National Association of Federal Retired Employees, NARF is also, all of them are up in arms over these because they can see what's happening as the private sector does. Because trust me, folks, if they're coming after protections in the federal government for unions, the next step is private sector unions. They're coming. And so we're urging everybody to reach out to their senators to let them know that these types of provisions are abhorrent, and it's just not getting enough uh, stuff out there. It's just attacks on federal employees are just unreal and worthless and shouldn't be happening, but yet they are.
Well, you and I are both veterans. 28 years of civil service for me, and you had more years than that. And one thing you and I have in common, we were both managers in the private sector before we came into government. And this thing that people believe, I think, is a falsehood that federal employees are lazy, they don't show up, that they don't have to work that hard. I never worked harder in my life than I worked in federal government work. And I would say that you've got your problem employees there, but you have them in the private sector as well. So I think making civil service in the federal sector less of an option for people hurts those people. But Duncan, you and I both know that federal civil service, this is true of the states also for the most, and cities for the most part, the salaries they offer are really not competitive compared to the private sector. You do this because you feel like you want to be part of something bigger than yourself. You want to be a part of something that is important to you. So all of these attacks on federal employees, people are going to start to feel that when they can't get their calls answered at Social Security, or their checks become a problem, they can't get their tax refunds or can't get questions answered from the Internal Revenue Service, when they can't get tornado warnings from the National Weather Service or hurricane alerts. I mean, these just massive cuts in federal employment, and I could go all down a long, long line, is not serving people well. So the decimation of the federal service is a serious matter in one other way, Duncan, is that it takes years to build up something like the federal civil service, like these agencies that do this work. You can destroy it overnight if you want, but building it back up again will take a long time. So we're all going to feel this, I think. Your final view on that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Institutional knowledge, walking and running out the door as fast as they can, and future recruitment and retention. Who'd want to work in that type of atmosphere? I think that's a huge issue.
Now, Duncan, you've had two very serious issues to discuss, and I have to give you what I think is the most important issue we'll discuss today. And it has to do with justice and pizza. Now, Epic Universe is this new theme park in Orlando. It's part of Universal, and it's getting rave reviews from all these people who like theme parks. And not only is the park itself getting rave reviews, all the restaurants are. They're saying it's a cut above most theme park in food. And one of the ones getting the best review is a place called Pizza Moon. I guess the pizza is over the moon. People love this pizza. Well, Epic Universe opened to the public. They've been open for a while for certain groups, but for the public, first opened on May 22nd. So as we record this, it's about right around a month old. Well, as of June 17th, Duncan, Pizza Moon enacted a new policy. In the past, at least that since they'd opened on May 22nd, if you had extra pizza, these pizza places always give you more pizza than you can possibly eat, right? So you could have it boxed up and take it away. The people who lived in Orlando took it home. The people who were staying there took it back to their hotel room, put it in a fridge, and could eat it later. Duncan, Pizza Moon has enacted a policy where you are not allowed to take your pizza outside the restaurant. You must eat it there or leave it there. Now, this came from a website called Universal News Today. They also do Disney World News Today, and all they do is report news from these theme parks in Orlando and other places, these big theme parks. So when they found this out, they went to the management of Pizza Moon and asked what in the world's going on. Well, when the manager found out who these people were, offered them a refund. They said, well, that's not going to help. All this excess food is still going to be laying around. So, Duncan, we need to get something organized. We need pizza justice for the people of Orlando.
Absolutely. I appreciate a pizza challenge as much as anyone. Okay, If you can't take it with you, you know, you have to eat it all. Okay, I understand that concept and challenge, but sometimes not even I'm up to that. But yeah, that's just what that policy is accomplishing. I would have no idea. So yeah, it is absolutely a pizza injustice.
Let's get to our serious story, the biggest story we will be discussing today. And the story that we're discussing today deals with sexual harassment. We're going to use a local example, but this could happen anywhere. And it just so happens it has to do with the mayor of Indianapolis, his administration, his campaign for reelection in 2023, and a key member of his staff and reelection campaign. The man in the center of this is a man named Thomas Cook, former chief of staff to the mayor of Indianapolis, Joe Hogsett. But as early as 2017, the mayor's office and others were hearing complaints about Thomas Cook in terms of allegations of sexual harassment. Well, as we understand the situation now from the media reports who unearthed some of this information, Mr. Cook was reprimanded by the city in 2017 and 2020. Then he resigned from city government in 2020, but when the mayor ran for re-election in 23, he came back as a member of his election campaign staff. But guess what? He was fired from that for allegations of sexual harassment. So in 2024, this was September of last year, the City County Council, just for those who don't know, in Indianapolis resides in Marion County, Indiana. Many years ago, there was a decision made by the state legislature to combine most city and county government, not all, but most city and county governments. We have a city-county council in Indianapolis, and that council hired an independent law firm to look into these allegations. It took 7 months. Just recently saw that report that came out, I think, in last month, May of this year. And their findings were twofold. First of all, again, this is a law firm doing this. No laws were violated by Mayor Hogsett. That was the first one. The second thing they had to say was quite interesting. And this is a quote from the report, that there was a culture of overly casual and at times professionally inappropriate. They're talking about the culture of the campaign and the city administration. But again, no legal wrongdoing at all. Well, the people who have been accusing this man of sexual harassment are represented by attorneys. And those attorneys said, well, wait a minute, that report wasn't complete. The mayor himself sent some text messages to these women that they thought was inappropriate, didn't like. I think we need to remember a couple of things. Number one, this was a law firm, and they were only looking at violations of law. And I don't think they actually did look into that to any great extent. But all of this has created a political problem for Mayor Hogsett. Now, he's already said he's not running for another term. His term ends, I think, I'm trying to think, it would be, 2027, I think it is.
Yeah.
Am I right? Duncan says I'm right on that. So anyway, so we have had 4 city county council members call for the resignation of the mayor. That's something. 3 Democrats and 1 Republican, and it's a Democrat majority body. Now, the mayor himself has maintained, hey, I acted appropriately, made changes in policy, required sexual harassment training every year for all my people. And he said he cooperated fully with the investigation. As far as we know, all of that, in fact, is true. So there's more to come. There's going to be a public comment session at the City County Council meeting at some point. That should be interesting to see. But in summary, I just want to say that, these are serious accusations that are being thrown out here. And the women who feel they're being victimized have not given up. They have continued their public campaign for this to be looked at even further. And in fact, one of the accusers was forcibly removed from a city county council meeting when she talked longer than the allotted time. And the president of the city county council had to apologize for that later. So, I mean, that's how serious things have become. My takeaways on this, Duncan, first of all, sexual harassment's been around for a long time. You and I have dealt with this as I dealt with it as a manager. You dealt with it as a union official in the federal government. And, after all these years of trying to get rid of this, it's still around very, very sadly. Maybe less of it now because people have pushed the idea that it's a bad idea, but it's still around. But it really comes down to this, Duncan. I think it's a power relationship. Someone with more power going after someone with less power. And that's just not right, whether it's sexual harassment and a whole list of other possibilities. I think we're going to continue to struggle with this whole area of sexual harassment. Again, it's everywhere in the private sector and the public sector. I use the example of Indianapolis, but Duncan, this could be happening anywhere. Curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, it is. I've known Mayor Hogsett. When I say known, I've met him a few times for many years. Extremely disappointed in the way that this unfolded. There should be a zero tolerance for sexual harassment. Period. End of story. I don't care whether it's, you're the president of the United States, the governor of a state, the mayor. There should be zero tolerance. And it seems like there's almost, in the last, 8 or 9 years, it seems like there's more acceptance of this anymore. That, we're going back to, oh, well, it was just teasing, or it's all in good fun, or we didn't mean anything by it. And that's BS again. There is absolutely no place for sexual harassment anywhere, but especially in the workplace. And as you mentioned, it's a power thing. I'm so, I've got this position up here. If you want to, something to happen, something good, you're going to have to do something for me. There should never, ever be a sexual quid pro quo in any organization, public or private. And like you said, it appears from what the law firm investigated that no laws were violated. But laws being violated, or, in this case, women being violated, are two different things. And I think that these women are absolutely right to feel righteous anger about how this situation was handled. And it just calls for more transparency on the part of the administration. Like you said, there are text messages that weren't in the report, things of that nature. It needs to be absolutely transparent to make sure that the administration, when they say, well, we've implemented sexual harassment training. Well, that's great. Are you doing anything about people when you do have complaints? How are you handling those complaints? Are you, punishing the offenders? When there is proof of that, are you trying to sweep it under the rug? And, both in the public and private sector, I've seen it tried to be swept under the rug, and that's absolutely abhorrent. So it's something that shouldn't be happening. Like I said, I'm scared that I've seen a resurgence of this over the last several years. And it's something that really bothers me to my core.
Duncan, the one thing that's still around, sadly, is this whole notion of, well, boys will be boys. We need to get past that. Okay. We need to get way past that. That is not something you should ever say. So, with that in mind, Duncan, we are going to go to the next section of our podcast where we're going to do our Critics Corner, something we've seen, read, experienced that we would like to discuss. And I will give you the first shot at telling us what you have seen or read in the past week.
Yeah, this week, my beautiful and lovely wife, awesome wife, Kim, said, okay, you need to pick out a movie. No pressure there, for those of you who've been in that position. So, wanted something light, romantic, maybe something of that nature, and stumbled across a Netflix movie that had gotten pretty high ratings, a movie called Nonas, with Vince Vaughn, Brenda Vaccaro, Susan Sarandon, several other great actors and actresses. And it was just a really heartwarming, funny, romantic, there was a little bit of romantic in there, movie as well. Told a great story based on a true story. And if you have Netflix, I highly, highly, highly recommend Nonas. It is just a good time watch. And just we can't recommend it highly enough.
Yeah, Susan Sarandon has to be one of the most versatile actors, actresses that we have in Hollywood these days. Even though, she's getting up in her years, she still gets very good roles and she always pulls it off well. As you probably know, I'm a fan of documentary films, be they on TV, in a movie theater, whatever. And I want to just wrap up something I talked about last week. I talked about The Mortician, which is a very troubling documentary. It's about a man named David Sconce. Again, he was in a family that was in the mortician business. I want to talk a little about this whole business of being a mortician, but you make a lot of money in that business. I mean, you really do. It's a good way to make a living. Let's put it that way. But David Sconce decided he wasn't making enough money, and he ended up doing some things that were just not ethical. I use the word ethical because he would give people ashes that they thought were ashes of their own loved one. It turns out to be a combination of 15, 20 people who were cremated at the same time, which is just creepy beyond creep. Well, this David Sconce guy, he was accused of a lot of very awful things, and this documentary talks about those. Was even implicated in a murder, never convicted. And I want to make that clear. He was never convicted of anything, but they talk about, you know, the deaths of a couple of people, and whether he was involved or not. There was no conviction of him. So I want to make sure that's the case. But this documentary explores some people who died who knew Sconce or were involved with Sconce, and you can make your own, reach your own conclusions if you watch this. But Sconce, he was convicted of this misconduct dealing with dealing with these people with the ashes. I mean, that's these cremation issues were violations of law. He did some time for that. The problem with Sconce is he would get out of prison and he couldn't follow his probation rules. He would get in trouble over something else, and he kept going back to prison because he couldn't possibly stay with the probation rules he had. And finally he got out. And I guess these documentary filmmakers offered because nobody else would apparently willing to pick him up from prison. I mean, when you're released from prison, you got to figure out a way to go wherever you want to go. And they offered to pick him up and take him somewhere, and they did this series of interviews with him. Rather troubling interviews, I think, if you watch them. But I've now seen all 3 episodes. It's troubling, but it's revealing. And I wondered, how could this be interesting? Documentary, a 3-part documentary about a mortician. Well, it's compelling. It does make its point. By the way, they have a long list of executive producers. Those are normally people who contribute money to it. One of the executive producers on this documentary film is Jonah Hill, famous actor. So there were some other people who chipped in money for this HBO documentary. It's on HBO Max right now. I'm going to talk about another HBO documentary in a minute. So if you don't subscribe to HBO Max, you can get a free trial of at least a couple of weeks. So if you want to watch these, you can at least, if they sound interesting to you, you can pick up your free trial and watch it that way. So Duncan, what do you have for us?
Yeah, that's one of those things where you talk about they do make a good deal of money because, normally, let me tell you, caskets do not usually cost $10,000. There may be a slight markup in some of that stuff. But yeah, that's, you're dealing with people who are at their most vulnerable, and, when this type of things happens, and for anybody to take advantage of that. And again, I'm sure morticians are just like any other professions. The vast majority are great people doing it the right way. But when you have something like this, an example in this documentary, it just scares the heck out of everybody.
My father, for a short time, worked as a mortician, worked in a mortician's office before he went to work for the federal government very briefly. And he said you could always tell when you were dealing with an unethical mortician because when they try to sell you the casket, if they say, remember, this is the last thing you'll ever buy for them, you know that this is not somebody you want to deal with. So Duncan, give us your first review.
That was I had the no-nos, and that was my review.
Okay, that was your review. Okay, I have one more. I'm sorry, I thought you had another one. I have one other documentary to talk about, and this has to do with Ohio State University. The name of the documentary is Surviving Ohio State, and it surrounds a man by the name of Richard Strauss, Dr. Richard Strauss. And he dealt with athletes at Ohio State, particularly the wrestling team, a hockey team, and some other sports. He did the physicals and dealt with injuries and those sorts of things. He had that job from 1978 through 1998. And this documentary film brings out some very troubling reports about him. What often happens in a case like this, let's say you're on the wrestling team. Some of these young men who are on the wrestling team at a place like Ohio State, which is a big university, obviously, a big athletic department, they get, sometimes they would get, in fact, often in Ohio State's case, they would get a scholarship to go to college. And a lot of these young men come from families who are in rural areas they may be the very first person in their family to ever go to college. So that scholarship is like gold for these men. Well, there were allegations of Dr. Richard Strauss doing some very untoward things to these men in a sexual nature. The problem was it had been reported for years, and they talk in detail with some of these victims who just gets it openly with the documentary filmmakers. And, you know, this, again, think about the time he was there, 1978 through 1998. He was at Ohio State. Many reports would come in. What happened? Well, eventually, Dr. Strauss was removed from his job, but they gave him Professor Emeritus status. That's something you do for somebody who's had a golden record when they leave the university. Then he goes out to California and ends up committing suicide there, not because he had any guilt, but because he was in a lot of pain. At least that's what the coroner said. His writings that they found before his suicide indicated he couldn't handle the pain, couldn't manage the pain, so he committed suicide as a result of that. But the two figures that figure, well, there are really three sets of figures. One is the coach of the wrestling team, a man named Russ Hellickson, who was the coach at the time these men were wrestling for Ohio State. And another that may be a familiar name to you, Jim Jordan, who was the assistant wrestling coach at Ohio State at the time, had been a star wrestler at the University of Wisconsin during his college years. Jim Jordan is now Representative Jim Jordan, who has a very key chairmanship of a committee in the House of Representatives today. So whether these men had any culpability, did they really know? These athletes seem to think so. And you can draw your own conclusions. I mean, to this day, Jordan claims he knew nothing about it. But some of these athletes have a different view, and some other people had a different view of that. But the third part of it is the fact that the university as an institution allowed this to happen. From 1978 through 1998, and when they had an outside firm come in and do an investigation, they verified 177 instances, and I think there's many more that people just didn't want to talk about it. They have no idea how many, but they verified and documented 177 cases of this doctor abusing people. So Ohio State, what they did is they had a board of trustees meeting, allowed some of these victims to come in and talk, and the trustees acted like, we're sorry this happened. We really are. We'll work not to see that it doesn't happen again. But then the lawsuits came. Now, here's the thing that I found striking about the lawsuits. Michigan State and Penn State, two other Big Ten schools, had serious issues about this. They were different kinds, but there were still sexual abuse, whatever sexes, or whether it's a male and a female or two males, it's still sexual abuse. When they finally settled lawsuits at Michigan State and Penn State, the victims got, I think it was somewhere around this, the documentary cites all this, $1.2 million apiece. Ohio State made a settlement offer to these victims in the Ohio State situation. Offered each of them $250,000 apiece. But on top of that, wanted a clause in the settlement saying that Ohio State takes no responsibility. And that was the part where these wrestlers said, "Oh no, we are, we don't care if it takes 15 years." I mean, they knew the lawyers said, "Hey, this could go on for. We don't care. You know, it's not about the money. We want if they're paying money, we want them to have an incentive to never do this again. That's what the legal system is supposed to be about when you pay damages like this." So again, a compelling documentary, one of the best I've seen on HBO Max. I guess they call it HBO Max now. Surviving Ohio State. If you don't have an HBO Max subscription, get yourself one of those free samplings. You can get, I think, a couple of weeks, and you can watch these during that. It's just amazing that these sorts of things still go on, Duncan, but it does. And I'm glad that there are documentary filmmakers out there trying to let us know what's happening.
Yeah, athletic trainers and team doctors, be it in high school, college, or professional sports, have a tremendous amount of closeness with the athletes, and to see it abused like that is just absolutely reprehensible. And again, it goes back to transparency, to make sure that people know this is what we've done, this is what we've seen, things of that nature. Don't do a cover up. Don't do the old boys network and allow it. Basically confront it, deal with it harshly, so you can ensure that it doesn't happen again.
And what bothered me the most, Duncan, is that these men who were victims, that they had what you would expect to have. They had drinking problems, abuse, substance abuse problems. They had broken marriages. But Duncan, most of these men who suffered this abuse refused to see a doctor.
Yep.
To this day. Now that is, I think, one of the worst things that could come out of that. Anyway, Duncan, let's wrap this up. I had a top 5 list at our last podcast, and it's your turn. So let's have your top 5 list for our podcast this time.
Okay, this one's going to be, we're trying to end on a little upbeat note this week. We had some serious topics. Being with the NBA playoffs right now, so proud of the Indiana Pacers. They're battling to go to Game 7 on Sunday. The top 5 reasons the Pacers are a better organization than when I worked for them more than 40 years ago.
Okay, let's hear it.
Number 5, the Simons are much better owners than the Nassi-Mariana combo that preceded them. I worked for the Simon organization for 1 year, and let me tell you, night and day.
There's a whole story behind Nassi. We'll get to that someday.
Oh, yeah, that would be a whole nother podcast with the stuff I had about that one while working for the Nassi and Mariana. Yikes, 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 triple yikes.
Okay.
Gamebridge is a much better arena than Market Square was. Even when Market Square Arena was originally built, it wasn't the nicest, it wasn't the fanciest. Trust me, Gamebridge is much better. The players nowadays have much better entourages than, say, me, as I was an entourage for a couple of players at different times.
Wait, you were the entourage?
When you're a young man and, late teens, early 20s, and a player agent who's now very famous, who I won't name, but he represented a player later on who was, very big with a company called Nike, designed his own shoe, said, when I don't know where my player is, I call Duncan because he knows. And that's all this stuff I'm saying is absolutely true, happened.
Well, I believe it.
Number 2, no current Pacer player, I'm sure, who got here traded in midseason ever had to drive my late mother's TR6 convertible. And if you ever wanted to see something that looked a lot like the Flintstones, it would be a 6'6" basketball player in a convertible driving that with the head sort of bumped up against the convertible top.
I was going to say, you'd almost have to take the top off just to get them in the car.
Yep. And the number 1 reason why the Pacers are a better organization than when I worked for them over 40 years ago, I'm betting they've never had to retrieve a used jockstrap that the visiting team needed after a game.
Oh, dear.
We were in such dire straits that after the game, the trainer I worked for, a wonderful, awesome man named David Craig, who was the trainer for the Pacers for decades and one of the best bosses and best human beings I've ever been around. The team, who happened to be the Los Angeles Lakers, said, we're short a jockstrap. Can you guys get one? And I was visiting team ball boy at the time. Said, sure, I'll grab one. Got one. David came to me and said, you need to get the jockstrap back after the game. I'm like, you're kidding me, right? You're kidding me. He goes, no, we need that jockstrap. We're that tight on money.
Oh, my gosh.
When I relayed this to the trainer of the Lakers at the time, God bless him, he looked at me and he said, you're serious, aren't you? Yes, sir, I am. And he said, I'll tell you what, when we get back to LA, I'm going to send you guys a case of them. I said, that'll work for me, that I don't have to deal with that. Thank you, sir.
I think we, in a future podcast, need to tell that whole story about how the Pacers nearly left town when Sam Nassi was supposed to be the owner, and it was really Jerry Buss, and he just couldn't own two teams at the same time.
Yeah, it was.
Was it really odd? And of course, they poured no money into it. So when you're borrowing jock straps and wanting them back, money is tight. Oh, that is quite a story. That's a great top 5. I don't know if I can top that next week, but I'll try. Duncan Giles, thank you. This is Lannan and Giles Unscripted. If all goes well and nobody raids our headquarters, if they can find it, we will be back again next week for another unscripted podcast. We have one ask for you as the audience. Like and subscribe to this podcast. We appreciate it. Duncan and Larry will be back soon with another episode. In the meantime, this is Unscripted.